Spawn is actually a really fascinating character, probably one of the most recognizable names in the industry. Far past most other comic characters, seeing as he has no attachment to DC or Marvel, he's kind of a superhero, but much darker than the norm. And he only had one TV show and one movie, and that movie was, well, something else. But in 30 plus years, Spawn hasn't had really a big push outside of comics. Now, of course, there are the toys of Spawn, and I'm sure that McFarlane in general toys sell very well, as he's kind of built his empire on that, and that is great. But toys can only go so far. People collect toys because they are a fan of the comics, the movies, that's the big time. And only having one movie, and not a very good movie, it's amazing how relevant Spawn still is. Now, let's go back in time for a minute. Marvel and DC were dominating comics for as long as anyone can remember in the 70s, the 80s, and even the early 90s. They were the publishers. But Marvel and DC burnt a lot of people, mainly artists, and those artists had enough of putting in work and not being appreciated and not paid fairly. In comes Image, a company created by the biggest in the industry such as Jim Lee, Eric Larson, Rob Liefeld, and soon to be one of the biggest names in the 90s, and still pretty relevant today, Todd McFarlane. Now, Image is still around. In fact, not only are they still around, but they are the third biggest publishers in comics. On top of that, they release some of the greatest comics of all time, including things like Saga, The Walking Dead, Invincible, and many, many more. But there's one title that blew away sale numbers in 1992, and that is Spawn Issue 1. Selling 1.7 million copies, this creator-owned comic was a juggernaut and did not stop. Not only that, but Spawn is still going, passing the record-breaking 300 issue mark a couple of years ago. Spawn refuses to stop producing issues, making it the longest running creator-owned comic. Not only that, but recently Spawn has exploded into a universe of Spawns, I guess you can say, bringing in titles such as Scorched and King Spawn. Not only are they critically both received well, but King Spawn broke records, nearly selling 500,000 copies. Okay, so Spawn is a pretty big deal, despite his movie not being a good movie. And despite his TV show being critically liked, but never blowing up, to sell the way King Spawn did is actually pretty amazing, especially in this day and age. Well, a comic being good is subjective. I can tell you to read Saga right now. I think it's one of the greatest, if not greatest, comic ever made. And you could say it's one of the worst comics that you ever read. Now, you would be 100% wrong, but it would still be your opinion. I'm just joking. That was the point of the subjectiveness. Well, here's the thing with Spawn. I read a lot of it. Spawn that started with good old Todd from issue 1 and his glorious over-the-top, tons of chains and big guns, to big-time writers taking over in issue 2, like Alan Moore writing Spawn. I read the first 75 or so issues, and then I stopped. And then I picked it back up around issue 150, which I believe is the Armageddon arc, and, I read it for a little while, and then I kind of stopped again. And eventually, Al Simmons, the Spawn that you probably know of at one point, passed on the mantle. And to be honest, I kind of just dropped it then because I didn't really like it that much, and I didn't think the writing was that great, and the art was not good, if I'm being honest. Now, you're sitting there and listening and going, well, so the answer to this video is no, Spawn isn't worth reading. Well, yeah, it kind of sucks. Or I should say that it doesn't completely suck, but never really elevates itself beyond the typical over-the-top violence and action that the series is known for. But to my surprise, Spawn has gotten actually better with age. Not the old issues. I meant some of the newer stories, not to confuse you guys. See, when Al Simmons returned as Spawn, it was a bit of a kick in the ass. Spawn needed to be interesting again. I myself actually caught up with the last 4 arcs, or the 4 arcs since Al Simmons came back, and listen, it's dumb. I'm not gonna lie, but it's really fun. The art changes a bit too much for my liking though, and some of the arcs are not as good as others, but overall, I have to say, it's not a bad read, which is a big surprise for me coming back years and years later. Would I say it's worth reading? Well, I'd say that depends. Do you want a flair of the 90s and modern day? Did you say yes? Then this isn't a bad jumping on point. Resurrection catches you up with the current status quo for Spawn, but again, if I'm being 100% honest, this isn't a must-read. None of the main Spawn really is worth reading unless you have a distinct interest in reading this character. I can't even like give you an arc or storyline worth checking out other than Resurrection, because I think it's a good jumping on point. But Spawn alone, like thinking back at all the issues I read, which are well over 100, probably closer to 150 issues, I have to say maybe the origin, maybe the first 5 issues, just because of how big it was back in the day, and Resurrection was halfway decent. But again, there's no great storylines. But luckily, Spawn isn't the only Spawn comic anymore. Did that make sense? What I mean is that there's Spawn-related stuff worth reading. Sam and Twitch was about 2 detectives in the Spawn universe, and a lot of it was written by Michael Brian Bendis, and it was actually really fun. If you were into Powers, this is similar to that, and it's a bit more dour, but still has that same energy you expect from this writer. But if that's not your thing, and you can't find any copies that are cheaper, and you just want to jump into big battles and action, you don't have to worry. Spawn has currently 3 spin-offs, and to my surprise, all 3 are actually pretty good and pretty much worth reading. The weakest of the bunch would be the Spawn Gunslinger for me, which isn't bad per se. It's actually pretty damn fun, but it's also written by Todd McFarlane, and Todd is a great artist, but a subpar writer at best, and it shows. So he has cool ideas here, but not the best execution. However, like I said, it's still a pretty fun title. Then you have the 2 best titles in my opinion. You have King Spawn by Sean Lewis, which is dark, disgusting, and edgy, and everything that I want in Spawn, with better writing than I expected, and art by Javier Fernandez. And this is some top tier edgy shit. You know what I'm talking about? Like eyes popping out, explosion with kids. Like it's just crazy. But, you know, I gotta say, I like that. Spawn needs to be edgy. It's in its DNA, and I live for that when I read Spawn. The edgier, the better. But pair it with solid writing and excellent art, and you have a way to elevate over just the Top Gun-wielding chain lover Spawn, and actually make an interesting story with characters I actually like. And the last title is Scorched, also written by Sean Lewis with art by Stefan Segovia, and this is a lot of fun too. This is basically like, remember Marvel team-ups? It's kind of like that with different characters in the Spawn universe teaming up, and again, I can't stress this enough, I'm not saying this is the greatest written thing, but Sean Lewis makes it fun. Fun and dumb. And you know what? Sometimes that's great in comics. Sometimes that's all I want to read is these laid-back, fun, edgy, kind of 90s feels, but with modern dialogue. And he does a pretty damn good job, and it's worth checking out this title too. However, is Spawn worth reading? Well, I'm going to give you 2 answers here. So in the main Spawn series, you're wondering, is it worth dipping into? Well, we have over 330 issues, and from the 150 or so issues I've read, maybe even more, I have to slide into the no. It's not really worth investing your time in it since, come on, these comics are hardly ever going to elevate themselves further than decent or maybe good storylines once in a blue moon. Now my second answer is, should you check out the side stories, or the spin-offs I should say, and I'm going to go with a yes. These are fun, and they just started, so they are very easy to jump into. Might be slightly confused, but you'll catch on pretty quick that Sean Lewis does a good job of catching you up, and I missed a good portion of Spawn issues in the last, I'd say, year or so or 2, and I jumped right in and had no problem reading these. So it's easy to follow along, and it gives you that 90s love injection that you want inside of you right now, and that sounded really dirty, but you know what I mean. So while the comics are questionable in quality, and the movie sucked ass, and the TV show was way too short-lived to make an impact, Spawn is a very big name. Obviously, it still sells, as evident with King Spawn's sales. But what would turn Spawn around? What would make him an A-lister in quality? I believe a good TV show is the way to go. Animated for sure nowadays would work really well with things like Invincible being such a big hit, or a great rated R movie, more of a slow burn feel with more of a detective style going on with Twitch, and I think that would work really well. Will McFarlane ever release that Spawn movie that he's been talking about for like 10 years? I don't know. Let's see. But for now, I gotta say Spawn sits in a really weird spot, on top of the throne as a king for being so famous by name alone, but without any actual big-time quality arcs to back it up. So you can kind of say he's like the king of nothing. Let's hope that we get more titles like Scorched and King Spawn in the future, and maybe itching closer to quality arcs that I can recommend. So, one last time, should you jump into Spawn from issue 1? Maybe just the first 5 issues, and good luck with the rest. And maybe Resurrection is a good jumping on point if you really want to get into this character. Otherwise, if you don't have much interest, it's skippable. I will say, though, check out King Spawn or Scorch. They're both really fun. I believe the trade paperback of Scorch is coming out soon, but King Spawn's first volume is out, so check it out. I really hope you guys enjoyed these videos. I really hope that the creators understand where I'm coming from. I did not mean to insult your work when I'm saying dumb or fun. I think it is fun. I like dumb fun. It could just be silly. We're reading comic books about guys with fucking chains and big-ass guns. I'm cool with that. My point is it worth getting into? And I do think the spin-offs are worth checking out right now. So go check those out, and let's hope one day we actually get a Spawn movie or a Spawn TV show. I am in the Spawn TV show camp. Hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to like, subscribe, and if you want to share, that's awesome. Have a good day.